I never imagined that parking my car in my own driveway would lead to a woman being handcuffed and escorted into a police cruiser, but that's exactly what happened on what should have been an ordinary Sunday morning. Living in a neighborhood with a homeowners association was already proving to be challenging, but nothing prepared me for the battle that would unfold with Linda Pearson, infamously known as Karen among residents. Since moving here 3 months ago, I'd experienced my fair share of passive-aggressive notes about my garbage bin placement and lawn maintenance, but this situation escalated beyond anything I could have anticipated. There I was, still in my pajamas, coffee in hand, watching in disbelief as a tow truck was backing into my driveway while Karen stood nearby with her clipboard in that smug look of authority. My silver Honda, parked exactly where it had been for weeks, was apparently now violating some obscure HOA rule she'd likely invented that morning. What followed was a chaotic scene of shouting, phone calls, legal documents being waved around, and ultimately, the sweet satisfaction of watching the same police officer who arrived to mediate the dispute end up reading Karen her rights. The tow truck driver looked as stunned as the gathering neighbors, all witnessing the dramatic downfall of our neighborhood's self-appointed tyrant. Pinecrest Estates was marketed as an exclusive community for discerning homeowners, but after 3 months of living here, I was beginning to interpret that phrase as overpriced houses with insufferable neighbors and Byzantine rules. The HOA handbook I received upon moving in was a 47-page manifesto detailing everything from acceptable mailbox designs to the precise height grass could reach before being deemed unruly. The section on vehicles alone spanned 6 pages, though nowhere did it state that I couldn't park my own car in my own driveway. I'd purchased the modest 3-bedroom colonial after my divorce, seeking a fresh start in a safe neighborhood with good schools for weekend visits with my daughter. The premium I paid for the property seemed worthwhile for the well-maintained roads, manicured common areas, and security patrol. What the realtor failed to mention was Linda Pearson Karen, as the neighbors called her behind her back, the HOA board secretary who wielded the community guidelines like a weapon. Our first encounter occurred just 2 days after I moved in when she left a laminated notice on my door about my garbage bins being visible from the street. The second came a week later regarding some moving boxes still in my garage that could be seen when the door was open. By the third week, she'd cited me for failing to submit a landscaping plan for approval before planting a small vegetable garden in my backyard. Each infraction was documented with photographs and formal letters citing specific bylaw numbers, always ending with vague threats about fines and further action. I tried reasoning with her, explaining that I was still getting settled, but her pinched expression and condescending tone made it clear that exceptions wouldn't be tolerated. Rules are rules, she'd say, clutching her clipboard like it contained state secrets. They're what keep our property values high. My neighbors had warned me about her. The retired couple next door rolled their eyes at the mention of her name, and the young family across the street had an ongoing battle regarding their children's basketball hoop. She's on a power trip, Mark from 2 doors down had told me over beers one evening. Her husband left her 5 years ago, and now the HOA is her whole life. Just keep your head down and try to stay off her radar. I tried to follow that advice, but it seemed Karen had marked me as her personal project. That fateful Sunday began peacefully enough. I'd slept in after a late night catching up on work, looking forward to a quiet day of watching football and ordering takeout. The sound of a diesel engine outside my window around 10 a.m. seemed odd for a weekend, but I thought nothing of it until I heard a loud metallic clank. Glancing outside, I froze at the sight of a Peterson's towing truck backing into my driveway, its hydraulic lift lowering toward my Honda. I rushed downstairs and out the front door in record time, still in my pajama pants and faded college t-shirt. What the hell is going on? I demanded, hurrying across the lawn. The tow truck operator, a heavy-set man with a weathered face, looked up with mild surprise, but it was the figure standing beside him that caught my attention. Karen, dressed in her Sunday best, a floral dress and cardigan that screamed church service followed by brunch, was holding her ever-present clipboard and pointing at my car. "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell," she said with artificial sweetness. "I'm afraid your vehicle is in violation of community standards and needs to be removed." I blinked at her, certain I had misheard. "Excuse me? That's my car. In my driveway." Karen's smile remained fixed as she flipped through her papers. According to Section 7.3 of the Community Guidelines, vehicles parked in visible areas must be maintained in pristine condition. Your car has a dent in the rear bumper and hasn't been washed in some time. Additionally, vehicles cannot remain stationary in driveways for more than 72 hours, and yours hasn't moved since Thursday. I stood there in disbelief, trying to process her words while simultaneously watching the tow operator attaching chains to my car. The dent she referred to was barely noticeable, a small ding from a shopping cart in a supermarket parking lot. And the washing rule? That was absurd. We were in a drought with water restrictions. As for not moving my car, I'd been working from home for days, but had definitely used it Friday to get groceries. Stop right now, I shouted to the tow truck driver before turning back to Karen. This is ridiculous. You can't tow a car from private property for something so trivial, even if those rules existed, which I doubt. Karen's expression hardened. As HOA secretary, it's my responsibility to enforce the guidelines. Mr. Peterson here has a contract with our association to remove non-compliant vehicles. The tow operator, presumably Mr. Peterson himself, looked uncomfortable. Lady said it was authorized, he mumbled, continuing his work. I pay my HOA fees every month, and nothing gives you the right to trespass on my property and take my possessions, I argued, my voice rising with each word. I have the HOA manual inside, and I know there's nothing in there about car washing schedules or parking duration on private property. Karen's eyes narrowed behind her designer glasses. Perhaps you should have read the supplementary guidelines distributed at last month's meeting, which you didn't attend. That was it. I stormed back into the house, nearly tripping in my haste. I grabbed my phone to call the police, then remembered the HOA documents stored in my home office. By the time I returned, clutching both my phone and the binder of community regulations, Peterson had already lifted the rear of my Honda off the ground. I'm calling the police, I announced, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. This is theft and trespassing. Karen scoffed. Don't be dramatic. The HOA has enforcement authority. No, it doesn't, I interrupted, thumbing through the manual. Here it is, Section 7. Vehicle regulations apply to common areas and streets only. There's nothing about driveways, nothing about washing requirements, and nothing about a 72-hour rule. You're making this up. I turned to Peterson, who had paused his work. If you take this car, you're participating in theft, and I will press charges against both of you. Peterson looked from me to Karen, clearly reassessing the situation. Ma'am, is this a private driveway? He asked her. Because we're not supposed to remove vehicles from private property without owner consent or proper authorization. Karen's face flushed. I have authorization as a representative of the Homeowners Association, she insisted, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. Meanwhile, I had the police dispatcher on the line, explaining the situation. Someone is attempting to illegally tow my vehicle from my private property, I said, giving my address. I need an officer here immediately. Karen stepped closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You're making a scene. The neighbors are watching. Indeed, several curious faces had appeared in nearby windows, and Mark from down the street was now standing on his front lawn in his bathrobe, watching with undisguised interest. Lower my car right now, I told Peterson firmly. The tow operator hesitated, looking at Karen one more time before sighing heavily. Sorry lady, but if there's a dispute and the police are coming, I'm not getting involved. He began the process of disengaging his equipment. Karen's face contorted with anger. This is insubordination. The board will hear about this, she hissed at him. I'm a paying customer. And I'm trying to run a legitimate business, Peterson replied, now clearly annoyed. I was told this was an authorized removal from a community area, not someone's private driveway. As he finished unhooking my car, I could hear police sirens in the distance. Karen must have heard them too, because her demeanor suddenly changed. There's been a misunderstanding, she said, her voice falsely bright again. I was simply trying to enforce community standards. Perhaps we can discuss this reasonably without involving law enforcement. But it was too late for that. I'd had enough of her harassment, and now I had proof of how far she was willing to go. 2 police cruisers pulled up in front of my house within minutes, their arrival drawing even more curious neighbors onto their lawns. Officer Martinez and her partner, Officer Reynolds, approached with professional caution, taking in the scene of the tow truck, my half-hoisted car, Karen's indignant stance, and my disheveled appearance. "What seems to be the problem here?" Officer Martinez asked, addressing the group. We all started speaking at once until she held up her hand. "One at a time, please." "Sir, since you made the call, why don't you start?" I took a deep breath, collecting my thoughts. This woman authorized a tow company to remove my car from my own driveway without my permission, claiming vague HOA violations that don't actually exist in our community guidelines. I handed over the HOA manual, open to the relevant section. As you can see, there's nothing here giving the HOA authority over private driveways or the condition of cars parked on private property. Officer Martinez skimmed the document while Officer Reynolds spoke with Peterson, who was now leaning against his truck with an expression of someone who regretted getting out of bed that morning. Karen interjected, her voice high and defensive. "As HOA secretary, I have broad enforcement powers to maintain community standards. That car," she pointed dramatically at my Honda, "has been stationary for days and violates our aesthetic requirements." Officer Martinez looked up from the manual. "Ma'am, I need to see documentation of these powers you're claiming. Do you have written authorization to enter private property and remove vehicles?" Karen faltered, flipping frantically through her clipboard. "It's implied in the covenant. All residents agree to HOA oversight when they purchase property here." Officer Reynolds rejoined us, notepad in hand. "The tow operator says he was told this was a common area violation and that proper authorization was in place. He states he wouldn't have attempted to tow from a private residence without court documents or owner consent." I seized the opportunity. "This isn't the first time she's harassed me," I explained, pulling out my phone to show the officers photos I'd taken of Karen's previous violation notices. "She's been targeting me since I moved in with trivial complaints and made-up rules." As I spoke, Mark from down the street approached, still in his bathrobe but now accompanied by his wife. "Officers, if I may," he said. "Linda has been doing this to residents for years. Last month, she had my son's car towed from the street in front of our house claiming it was improperly registered, though it wasn't. Cost me $275 to get it back." This opened the floodgates. Within minutes, half a dozen neighbors had gathered, each with their own story about Karen's overreach. Mrs. Abernathy, the elderly widow from across the cul-de-sac, revealed that Karen had threatened to place a lien on her home over unapproved holiday decorations. The Patels described receiving daily fines for their children's bicycles being visible in their backyard. Most significantly, Richard Wilson, the HOA treasurer, hurried over in golf attire and confirmed what we all suspected: the board never authorized Linda to contact towing companies or issue removal orders. That would require a full board vote and formal notice to homeowners. She's been acting completely outside her authority. The officers' expressions grew increasingly serious as they listened. Peterson, who had been quiet until now, suddenly looked panicked. "Wait, I need to show you something," he said, pulling out his phone. He scrolled through his text messages and handed the device to Officer Reynolds. "She's been sending me addresses for weeks, saying they were approved HOA removals. I've towed 6 cars from this neighborhood in the past month alone." Officer Reynolds examined the messages, then asked, "And how does payment work for these tows?" Peterson hesitated. "Usually the homeowner pays to get their car back from the impound lot. But in these cases, Karen arranged for the HOA to pay a flat fee up front, plus I give her a finder's fee for each vehicle." The silence that followed was deafening. Karen's face had drained of all color. "That's a lie," she sputtered. "I never received any personal payment. I was acting in the community's best interest." Officer Martinez turned to her partner. "I think we need to continue this conversation at the station." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Karen, realizing the gravity of her situation, suddenly bolted toward her immaculately maintained Mercedes parked across the street. She didn't get far. Officer Reynolds caught up to her before she reached the curb, and within moments, Karen was being read her Miranda rights as her wrists were secured behind her back with handcuffs. The neighborhood watched in collective shock as the self-appointed queen of Pinecrest Estates was guided into the back of a police cruiser, her clipboard abandoned on my front lawn. Peterson provided his official statement, and the officers took contact information from all the neighbors who'd come forward with complaints. I was asked to come to the station later that day to file a formal report. As the police cars drove away, with Karen visible through the rear window, staring straight ahead in stunned disbelief, an impromptu block party seemed to break out. Neighbors who had previously only exchanged cautious waves were now introducing themselves, sharing Karen stories, and laughing with the relief of prisoners who'd just witnessed their warden's downfall. The following weeks were a whirlwind of community meetings, legal proceedings, and surprising revelations. Karen was charged with fraud, attempted theft, trespassing, and abuse of power. The investigation revealed that she'd received over $3,000 in kickbacks from Peterson's towing company over the past year. The HOA board, horrified by the scandal, immediately removed her from her position and issued a formal apology to all residents who had been affected by her actions. Richard Wilson, the treasurer, organized an emergency meeting where the entirety of the HOA regulations was reviewed and revised with input from the community. The oppressive 47-page rulebook was streamlined to a reasonable 15 pages, with clear limitations on enforcement powers and a new requirement for transparency in all board decisions. A committee was formed to handle disputes, with a balanced representation of longtime and newer residents. I found myself nominated to this committee, and despite my initial reluctance, accepted the position as a way to ensure that no future Karens could abuse the system. The most satisfying moment came 3 months later when Karen appeared in court. As part of her plea deal, she was required to make restitution to all the residents she'd defrauded, perform 200 hours of community service beautifying public spaces in Pinecrest Estates, and attend anger management classes. She also sold her house and moved to a neighboring town, unable to face the community she had terrorized for so long. Peterson's Towing lost its business license for 6 months and was placed on probation for 2 years. As for me, I finally planted that vegetable garden without fear of violation notices, and my Honda, dent and all, sits proudly in my driveway. My neighbor Mark and I host monthly barbecues that have become community traditions, bringing together people who had previously been isolated by fear and suspicion. Pinecrest Estates is now the neighborhood I had hoped for when I moved in, friendly, supportive, and reasonable. Sometimes it takes a dramatic confrontation to remind people of what truly matters in a community. Not perfectly manicured lawns or pristine cars, but respect for each other's rights and the understanding that rules exist to protect, not control. And whenever I see a tow truck in the distance, I can't help but smile at the memory of that Sunday morning when standing up for myself led to liberation for an entire neighborhood.